The sound of hooves thundering across the moonlit plains sent Josephine Walker's heart racing as she pressed deeper into the scratchy hay. 3 days of hiding had left her parched, hungry, and racked with doubts, but anything was better than the marriage she'd fled. The smell of dust and dried grass filled her nostrils as she adjusted her once pristine wedding dress, now smudged with dirt and torn at the hem. Josephine tried to steady her breathing when she heard the barn door creak open below, sending shafts of early morning light climbing up the wooden walls. It was 1876 in the Montana Territory, and Josephine had just become the talk of Silver Creek. Running from your wedding wasn't something a proper lady did, especially not when the groom was Franklin Holloway, the wealthiest cattle baron for 100 miles. But Josephine had discovered the truth about Frank's business dealings, about the homesteaders who'd mysteriously disappeared, about the threats and the violence. She couldn't bind her life to such a man, no matter what her father had arranged. Footsteps echoed below, heavy boots on packed earth. Josephine held her breath, pressing a hand over her mouth. 3 days of hiding in the abandoned Miller barn had given her too much time to think and not enough food to keep her strength up. She'd been waiting for the right moment to steal a horse and ride west, perhaps all the way to Oregon or California. "I know you're up there, Miss Walker." The voice was deep calm with a hint of Texas in it. "Your hiding ends with me." Josephine froze. She recognized that voice. Isaac Everett, the new ranch hand at the neighboring property. They'd exchanged glances at church socials, nothing more. How had he found her? "I don't mean you any harm," Isaac continued, "but you can't stay up there forever." "Leave me be," Josephine called back, her voice cracking from disuse. "I'm not going back. Back to Holloway. I should hope not." There was something in his tone that made her pause. That man's no good for any woman, least of all one brave enough to run from her own wedding. Josephine inched toward the edge of the hayloft, peering down. Isaac stood below, hat in hand, revealing thick, dark hair. His blue eyes found hers immediately, as if he'd known exactly where she was hiding. At 25, he was only a few years older than her 20 summers, but his eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd seen much more of the world. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Saw your tracks 3 days ago heading away from town. Been keeping an eye on this place since." He set his hat back on his head. "Frank's men are searching every homestead and ranch for miles. It's only a matter of time before they check here again." Again. "They did a quick search yesterday. Didn't bother with the loft." He offered a small smile. "You chose well, but you need to move on." Josephine's stomach growled loudly enough for both of them to hear. Isaac reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Come on down, Miss Walker. I brought food." Hunger won out over caution. Josephine made her way down the ladder, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. Her once beautiful wedding dress caught on a nail, tearing further. She didn't care. That dress represented everything she was running from. Isaac politely averted his eyes until she reached the ground, then handed her the bundle. Inside, she found bread, cheese, and dried beef. Josephine devoured it without any pretense of ladylike manners. "Thank you," she said between bites. "But why are you helping me?" Isaac leaned against a post, keeping a respectful distance. "Let's just say I've got no love for Frank Holloway either. The man thinks money gives him the right to take whatever he wants." "Including me," Josephine said bitterly. "You're not property to be claimed," Isaac replied, his voice firm. "And you deserve better than being forced into a marriage with a man like that." Josephine studied him carefully. Isaac Everett had been in Silver Creek for less than 6 months. He worked hard, kept to himself, and rarely joined in the revelry at the saloon. Some called him standoffish, but Josephine had always sensed something different, caution, perhaps, as if he were watching and waiting. "I can't go back to town," she said finally. My father would just hand me over to Frank again. I know. Isaac nodded. That's why I'm offering to help you get away. Why would you risk that? Frank has half the county in his pocket, including the sheriff. Isaac's jaw tightened. Let's just say I have my reasons, but we need to move. I've got horses waiting about a quarter-mile from here. If we ride hard, we can make it to my friend's place near the mountains by nightfall. Josephine hesitated. Trusting a man she barely knew was risky, but staying meant eventual capture. How do I know I can trust you? Isaac met her gaze steadily. You don't. But right now, I'm offering you a chance. Frank's men will be back today. I overheard them planning another search of this area. He extended his hand. It's your choice, Miss Walker. Josephine looked at his calloused palm, then back to his face. There was something honest in those blue eyes that Frank Holloway's had always lacked. She placed her hand in his. Call me Josephine. Isaac nodded. Isaac Everett, at your service. He glanced at her torn dress. I brought some spare clothes. They'll be too big, but they'll make riding easier and you'll be less conspicuous. He handed her a bundle containing a flannel shirt, trousers, and a worn coat. Josephine clutched them, suddenly aware of the impropriety of changing clothes with a man present, even in these desperate circumstances. Isaac seemed to read her thoughts. I'll wait outside. Give a call when you're ready. Once alone, Josephine quickly shed her wedding dress, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders as the white fabric pooled at her feet. She pulled on the offered clothes, rolling up the sleeves and pant legs, securing the trousers with a length of rope Isaac had included. The clothes smelled of pine and horses and freedom. I'm ready, she called. Isaac returned, nodding with approval at her transformation. Keep your hair tucked under this. He handed her a hat. From a distance, you might pass for a young man. Where exactly are we going? Josephine asked as she twisted her long brown hair into a knot and hid it under the hat. My friend Thomas runs a small mining operation in the foothills. It's remote enough that Holloway's men won't think to look there. Isaac picked up her discarded wedding dress. We should burn this. Leave no trace. Josephine nodded, watching as Isaac struck a match and set the dress ablaze in a metal bucket. The flames consumed the white satin and lace, turning her past to ash. It felt symbolic somehow. Let's go, Isaac said, stamping out the last embers. Stay low and follow me. They slipped out of the barn, keeping to the tree line as they made their way toward where Isaac had hidden the horses. Josephine's heart pounded with each step, expecting to hear shouts of discovery at any moment. But they reached the horses without incident, 2 sturdy quarter horses, 1 chestnut and 1 bay. The chestnut is yours, Isaac said, helping her mount. His name is Copper. He's steady and fast. Josephine settled into the saddle, grateful for the countless hours she'd spent riding as a girl, often to her father's dismay. Where to now? North, through Miller's Pass. It's rough terrain, but Holloway's men usually avoid it. Isaac swung onto his own mount. Ready. Josephine nodded, and they set off at a trot, keeping to the cover of trees when possible. As they rode, Josephine found herself studying Isaac from the corner of her eye. There was a tension in his shoulders, a watchfulness that went beyond helping a runaway bride. You never said why you're willing to help me, she ventured after they'd been riding for an hour. Isaac was silent for so long that Josephine thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Frank Holloway drove my sister and her husband off their land last year. They had a small ranch, nothing special, but it was on a creek that Holloway wanted for his cattle. When they refused to sell, things got ugly. He paused. Their cabin burned down one night. They barely got out alive. That's terrible, Josephine said softly. Where are they now? Colorado. They lost everything here. Isaac's grip tightened on his reins. I came to Silver Creek 6 months ago to find out the truth, maybe get some justice. Instead, I found a town in Holloway's pocket and a system rigged against anyone who stands up to him." Josephine felt a chill despite the warm spring air. "I didn't know. About your sister, I mean. But I learned enough about Frank to know I couldn't marry him. The night before the wedding, I overheard him talking with some of his men about clearing out the Hanson family. They've been on that land for generations. Hanson has the water rights to the East Fork of the creek," Isaac nodded. "Holloway's been after those for years." "That's when I knew I had to run," Josephine continued. "My father, he's desperate. Our ranch hasn't been profitable since my mother died. He saw marrying me to Frank as the only way to save it." She sighed. "I understand his desperation, but I couldn't be part of Frank's cruelty." They rode in silence for a while, each lost in thought. The terrain gradually became more rugged as they approached Miller's Pass, a narrow trail winding through rocky hills. "We'll rest the horses here," Isaac said, stopping near a small stream shaded by cottonwoods. "Drink and refill your canteen. We've still got a long ride ahead." Josephine dismounted, her legs stiff from hours in the saddle. She led Copper to the stream, watching as he drank thirstily. The gurgle of the water and the whispering leaves created a peaceful moment that seemed at odds with their situation. "You think they're looking for me?" she asked quietly. Isaac nodded, scanning the horizon. "Frank won't take this humiliation lightly, running out on him in front of the whole town. His pride won't let that stand." "I'm sorry to have dragged you into this," Josephine said. "You didn't drag me anywhere." Isaac's voice was firm. "I made my choice, same as you made yours." Josephine studied him openly now. The sun highlighted the angles of his face, the determined set of his jaw. There was a kindness in his eyes that contradicted the hardness of his expression. For the first time since fleeing her wedding, Josephine felt a flutter of something besides fear, a spark of connection to this quiet man with his own score to settle. "We should keep moving," Isaac said, breaking into her thoughts. "The pass gets tricky after this, but it's the safest route." As they remounted and continued their journey, the terrain became increasingly difficult. The trail narrowed, sometimes barely wide enough for the horses to pass single file. On one side rose steep rock faces, on the other, sharp drop-offs plunged to the valley below. "Stay close to the wall," Isaac instructed as they navigated a particularly narrow section. "Copper knows the way, but don't let him drift too close to the edge." Josephine nodded, focusing on the trail ahead and trying not to look down at the dizzying heights. A loose stone skittered beneath Copper's hoof, causing the horse to sidestep nervously. Josephine's heart leaped into her throat as she steadied him. "Easy," she murmured, patting his neck. "We're all right." They had nearly cleared the treacherous passage when a distant sound made Isaac halt abruptly. Josephine strained to hear, then caught at the faint echo of hoofbeats. "Riders," Isaac said grimly. "Could be anyone, but we can't take chances." He led them off the main trail to a narrow ledge partially hidden by a stand of stunted pines. They dismounted quickly, Isaac helping Josephine navigate the rocky ground. The ledge opened into a shallow cave, just deep enough to conceal them and their horses. "Stay quiet," Isaac whispered, drawing his pistol. Minutes later, the sound of horses and men's voices drifted down from the trail above. Josephine held her breath as she recognized one of the voices: Silas Harper, Frank's foreman and most loyal enforcer. "Waste of time," someone was saying. "Girl's probably halfway to Denver by now. Boss says to check every trail," Silas replied. "She can't have gotten far on foot. What if someone's helping her? Then God help them when Frank finds out." Silas's laugh sent chills down Josephine's spine. "Let's keep moving. Check that ridge over there." The voices and hoofbeats gradually faded as the men moved on. Josephine released her breath slowly, realizing she'd been gripping Isaac's arm. She quickly let go. "Sorry," she whispered. "It's all right," he replied, holstering his pistol. "They're heading the wrong way, but we should wait a bit longer before moving on." In the close confines of the cave, Josephine became acutely aware of Isaac's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint scent of leather and pine that clung to him. There was safety in his nearness, a feeling she hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Isaac's eyes met hers in the dim light. "We're not in the clear yet, still. You didn't have to help me." "Maybe I did," he replied. "Maybe we've both been waiting for a chance to stand against Holloway." There was something in his voice, a depth of feeling that resonated with Josephine's own determination. In that moment, their shared purpose created a bond stronger than mere acquaintance. When they finally emerged from hiding and continued their journey, the atmosphere between them had shifted. They rode side by side where the trail allowed, conversation flowing more easily despite their circumstances. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when they crested a rise, and Isaac pointed to a distant collection of structures nestled in a wooded valley. "There it is," he said. "Thomas's place." Josephine felt a surge of relief mixed with trepidation. They'd made it this far, but what came next? How long could she hide? What future could a runaway bride hope for in a territory where news traveled fast and judgments faster? As if reading her thoughts, Isaac spoke gently. "One step at a time, Josephine. First, we get you somewhere safe. Then we figure out the rest." She nodded, drawing strength from his steady presence as they rode toward the mining camp and whatever awaited them there. The mining camp was smaller than Josephine had imagined, just a cluster of log cabins surrounding a central clearing, with the mine entrance visible on the hillside beyond. As they approached, a man emerged from the largest cabin, rifle in hand. "That's far enough," he called. Isaac raised his hand in greeting. "It's Isaac Everett, Thomas. I've brought a friend." The man squinted at them, then lowered his rifle. "Isaac, wasn't expecting you." His gaze shifted to Josephine, and despite her disguise, his eyes widened slightly. "Brought company, I see." "This is Josephine," Isaac said as they dismounted. "She needs a place to lie low for a while." Thomas Harrison was a bear of a man, with a thick beard streaked with gray and hands roughened by years of work. His sharp eyes took in Josephine's borrowed clothes and wary expression. "The runaway bride from Silver Creek?" he asked bluntly. "News travels even up here." Josephine stiffened. "Yes, that's me." Thomas scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Holloway's been sending riders all over the territory looking for you, offering a hefty reward too." "We ran into some of his men in the pass," Isaac said. "They didn't see us." Thomas nodded slowly. "Well, you've come to the right place if you're looking to disappear for a while. Not many folks come up this way, and those who do mind their own business." He gestured toward the cabin. "Come on in. You both look like you could use some food and rest." The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, with a large stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, and shelves lined with books, more than Josephine would have expected in a mining camp. A pot of stew bubbled over the fire, filling the room with savory aromas that made her stomach growl. "Sit," Thomas said, motioning to the table. "I'll fetch some bowls." As they ate, Thomas explained that his mining operation was small but profitable enough to keep him and his 4 workers comfortable. They mined silver primarily, making infrequent trips to the nearest town for supplies. "We keep to ourselves," he told Josephine. "Had our fill of town politics and cattle barons throwing their weight around." "Thomas used to be a lawyer in Denver," Isaac explained, "until he decided the mountains held more honest company than courtrooms." Thomas chuckled. Found more justice in these hills than I ever did wearing a suit and arguing before corrupt judges." He regarded Josephine thoughtfully. "You're welcome to stay as long as needed. There's a small cabin my foreman used before he moved on last winter. It needs some cleaning, but it's private." "Thank you," Josephine said sincerely. "I don't know how I'll repay your kindness." "Consider it my contribution to thwarting Franklin Holloway," Thomas replied with a wink. "Man tried to claim I was mining on his property last year. Had to show him the survey maps myself before he backed down." After the meal, Thomas showed them to the foreman's cabin, a snug one-room structure with a small stove, narrow bed, and table with 2 chairs. Dust covered every surface, but the roof was sound and the windows intact. "It's not much," Thomas apologized, "but it should serve." "It's perfect," Josephine assured him. After 3 days hiding in a hayloft, the cabin seemed luxurious. "I'll bring water and some clean linens," Isaac offered, "and help clear some of this dust." "I can manage," Josephine insisted. "You've done more than enough already." "I'll leave you folks to sort it out," Thomas said, heading for the door. "There's a pump out back for water. Supper's at sundown if you're hungry again by then." Once Thomas had gone, an awkward silence fell between Josephine and Isaac. The reality of their situation seemed to hit them both at once. They were alone, miles from town, with Josephine effectively in hiding. "I should see to the horses," Isaac said finally. "Make sure they're properly cooled down and fed." "Wait!" Josephine caught his arm before he could leave. "I meant what I said. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me." Isaac's expression softened. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for, Josephine. Not many women would have the courage to run from their own wedding, even to a man like Holloway." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Still am. Fear doesn't cancel out courage. Sometimes they go hand in hand." He gently removed her hand from his arm but held it briefly before letting go. "Get some rest. We can talk more later." After Isaac left, Josephine set about making the cabin habitable. She found a broom in the corner and began sweeping, the physical activity helping to settle her racing thoughts. As dust motes danced in the shafts of late afternoon sunlight, she contemplated her situation. She was a fugitive now, in a sense. Her father would be furious, possibly disown her completely. Frank Holloway would never forgive the public humiliation. Her reputation in Silver Creek was likely beyond salvaging, and yet, for the first time in months, she felt something like peace. She had made her choice and would face whatever consequences came. Isaac returned with buckets of water, clean linens, and a small bundle of personal item soap, a comb, and a nightgown that looked suspiciously new. "Where did you get these?" Josephine asked, fingering the soft cotton nightgown. "Thomas keeps supplies for the occasional female visitor," Isaac explained, then quickly added, "His sister comes up from Denver sometimes, and well, minors aren't always alone." Josephine blushed at the implication. "Of course, thank him for me." "I will." Isaac lingered by the door. "Will you be all right here? I can stay in the main cabin if you'd prefer privacy." "Where will you sleep if you stay here?" she asked, gesturing to the single bed. "Floor's fine for me. I've slept on worse." Josephine considered the offer. The thought of being completely alone in this unfamiliar place was somewhat daunting, but she was also acutely aware of propriety, what little of it remained after fleeing her wedding and traveling alone with a man. "Perhaps, just for tonight," she decided, "until I get my bearings." Isaac nodded, seemingly understanding her conflicted feelings. "I'll bring my bedroll after supper." When he had gone, Josephine poured water into the basin and washed her face and hands, relieved to remove the dust of travel. She combed her hair, wincing as the teeth caught in tangles formed during her days in hiding. By the time she had finished making the bed with the clean linens and tidying the small space, the cabin felt almost welcoming. Supper at the main cabin was a rowdy affair. Thomas's 4 workers, Jacob, Martin, Illy, and a giant of a man, everyone called Moose, treated Josephine with a mixture of curiosity and awkward courtesy. They clearly weren't accustomed to female company, but made efforts to mind their language and table manners. "So you're the gal who left Holloway standing at the altar," Moose said bluntly, earning him an elbow from Jacob. "What? It's what we're all thinking." "It's all right," Josephine said. "And yes, I am, though technically I left before reaching the altar." "Good for you," Illy said, passing her a plate of biscuits. "Holloway's got no right to own half the territory, let alone a woman who doesn't want him." "Hear, hear," Thomas agreed, raising his coffee cup in a toast, "to making your own choices." The men clinked their cups together, including Josephine, in their gesture of solidarity. She felt a strange sense of belonging among these rough miners who asked no questions beyond what she volunteered and offered acceptance without judgment. As the evening progressed, conversation flowed freely. Thomas recounted tales of his days practicing law, while the miners shared stories of their adventures in boomtowns across the West. Isaac remained quieter than the others, but Josephine noticed how he watched her, a small smile playing at his lips whenever she laughed at one of the men's jokes. Later, back in the small cabin, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed while Isaac arranged his bedroll near the stove. "They're good men," she observed. "Thomas and the others." "The best," Isaac agreed. "Thomas took me in when I first came looking for work after my sister lost her ranch. Didn't ask questions, just offered a fair wage and honest work." "How long did you stay here?" "About 4 months. Then I heard Holloway was hiring at his ranch, and I saw a chance to learn more about what happened to my sister's place." Isaac's voice hardened. "I needed to get close to find evidence of what he'd done." "Did you?" Josephine asked softly. Isaac shook his head. "Nothing that would stand up in court. Holloway's careful, keeps his hands clean while men like Silas do the dirty work." He looked up at her. "But I did learn enough to know the kind of man he is, the kind you're well rid of." Josephine hugged her arms around herself. "I just wish I'd realized sooner, before the wedding preparations, before my father became so invested in the match." "You realized in time," Isaac said gently. "That's what matters." They fell into comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire in the stove and the distant hooting of an owl. Josephine slipped under the covers fully clothed except for her boots, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their arrangement despite its innocence. "Isaac," she whispered into the darkening room. "Yes, what happens tomorrow, and the day after that, I can't hide forever." She heard him shift on his bedroll. "No, you can't, but you can lie low until we figure out a plan. Holloway's anger will cool eventually, or he'll find another bride to replace you." The thought of another woman suffering what might have been her fate troubled Josephine. "That poor woman." "One problem at a time," Isaac counseled. "For now, rest. You're safe here." Josephine closed her eyes, letting exhaustion wash over her. For the first time in days, she slept without fear of discovery, lulled by the steady breathing of the man who had risked his own safety to help her. In the days that followed, Josephine settled into the rhythm of life at the mining camp. She insisted on making herself useful, cooking meals for the miners and mending their clothes. The simple tasks gave her purpose and distracted her from worry about her uncertain future. Isaac divided his time between helping with the mining operation and making short scouting trips to gather news. Each time he left, Josephine found herself watching anxiously for his return, relief flooding through her when his familiar figure appeared on the trail. A week after their arrival, Isaac returned from one such trip with troubling news. Holloway had doubled the reward for information on Josephine's whereabouts and expanded his search to neighboring territories. "He's not giving up," Isaac reported grimly as he and Josephine walked along the creek that ran behind the cabins. "And there's more. Your father's ranch is in trouble. Holloway called in a loan your father had with the bank, a bank where Holloway happens to be a major investor." Josephine stopped short. "He can't do that." "He can, and he did. Your father has 30 days to repay the money or lose the ranch." Guilt crashed over Josephine like a wave. "This is my fault. If I had just gone through with the wedding—" "No," Isaac interrupted firmly, taking her by the shoulders. "Don't think that way. Your father made his choices, Holloway made his, and you made yours. You're not responsible for their actions." "But my father will lose everything," Josephine protested, tears welling in her eyes. "The ranch has been in our family for 2 generations. It's all he has since my mother died." Isaac's grip on her shoulders gentled. "I'm sorry, Josephine, truly. But sacrificing yourself to a man like Holloway wouldn't have solved anything. He would have controlled the ranch anyway, and you'd be trapped in a marriage to a cruel man." Josephine knew he was right, but the knowledge did little to ease her guilt. She turned away, staring at the rippling water of the creek. "I need to do something. I can't hide here forever while my father loses everything." "What are you thinking?" Isaac asked cautiously. "I don't know yet. But there has to be a way to expose Holloway for what he is, to break his hold on Silver Creek." Isaac was silent for a long moment. "There might be," he said finally. "I've been gathering information for months. Records of transactions, names of men who have been intimidated or driven off their land. Nothing solid enough on its own, but together, it might be enough to interest the territorial marshal." Hope flared in Josephine's heart. "Where are these records?" "Hidden at the ranch where I was working, in a loose floorboard under my bunk in the bunkhouse." Isaac ran a hand through his hair. "I couldn't risk taking them when I left to find you. We need to get them," Josephine said decisively. "We?" Isaac raised an eyebrow. "Josephine, it's too dangerous for you to go anywhere near Silver Creek." "I can't ask you to risk yourself again while I hide safely away," she insisted. "Besides, 2 people have a better chance than 1. I know the ranch. I've been there for dinner parties and socials. I could help." Isaac looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in Josephine's expression must have convinced him of her determination. "We'll talk to Thomas," he conceded. "See what he thinks." Thomas, as it turned out, thought the plan was reckless but understood their reasoning. "Holloway's hurt too many people," he agreed over a late-night discussion in the main cabin. "If there's a chance to bring him down legally, it might be worth the risk." "The key is getting in and out without being seen," Isaac explained, sketching a rough map of the Holloway ranch on a piece of paper. "The bunkhouse is here, behind the main house. Guards patrol the property, but they're predictable more concerned with keeping people out than watching for someone inside trying to leave." "When do we go?" Josephine asked. 2 days from now," Isaac decided. "Saturday night. Most of the hands will be in town, drinking away their pay. The ranch will be quieter." As they prepared over the next 2 days, Josephine noticed a shift in her relationship with Isaac. Their shared purpose created an intimacy that transcended their brief acquaintance. She found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his brow furrowed in concentration as he cleaned his pistol, the gentle way he spoke to his horse, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. More than once, she caught him watching her too, his blue eyes quickly darting away when she noticed. There was something unspoken growing between them, something neither seemed ready to acknowledge amid the more pressing concerns of their situation. The night before they were to leave, Josephine found Isaac sitting alone outside the cabin, staring up at the stars. She settled beside him on the rough-hewn bench, drawing her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "Too much on my mind. Having second thoughts about tomorrow, about taking you into danger." "Yes." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Josephine, if anything happened to you—" "Nothing will," she assured him, though she couldn't possibly know that. "We'll be careful." Isaac sighed, returning his gaze to the stars. "When I found you in that hayloft, I just wanted to help you escape. I never intended to drag you into my fight against Holloway." "You didn't drag me anywhere," Josephine echoed his words from days earlier. "And it's my fight too now." She hesitated, then added softly, "I'm glad you found me, Isaac." "Your hiding ends with me," he murmured, repeating what he'd said that first day. "I meant it as reassurance then, but now I worry it was presumptuous." "It wasn't." Josephine found the courage to place her hand over his where it rested on the bench between them. "It was a promise of safety when I needed it most." Isaac turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. The simple contact sent warmth spreading through Josephine's chest. They sat in silence, hands joined, each lost in thought about what tomorrow might bring. The journey back to Silver Creek was tense but uneventful. They traveled by night and rested during the day, avoiding the main trails where Holloway's men might be patrolling. Isaac had provided Josephine with darker clothes to better blend with the shadows, and they moved with careful deliberation. By Saturday evening, they had reached the wooded hills overlooking the Holloway ranch. Concealed among the trees, they watched as several riders departed for town, just as Isaac had predicted. "We'll wait another hour," Isaac whispered, "until full dark." Josephine nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. The ranch sprawled below them, the imposing main house with its wide veranda, the barn and corrals, and beyond them, the long, low bunkhouse where Isaac had lived during his time working for Holloway. "Once we're in," Isaac continued, reviewing their plan, "we go straight to the bunkhouse. The papers are under the third floorboard from the wall beside the last bunk. We get them and leave immediately. No detours, no heroics." "I understand," Josephine assured him. When darkness had fully settled over the valley, they made their move. Leaving their horses secured in the trees, they crept down the hillside, using the shadows for cover. Isaac led the way, moving with the silent grace of a man accustomed to stealth. They paused at the edge of the property, watching as a guard made his rounds, lantern swinging at his side. When he had passed, they darted across the open ground to the shadow of the barn. Josephine's heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give them away. Moving from building to building, they gradually made their way toward the bunkhouse. They were nearly there when a door slammed in the main house, making them freeze in place. Voices drifted through the night air, one of them unmistakably Frank Holloway's. "I want those fences checked at first light," he was saying to someone on the porch. "And double the men watching the north boundary. Those nesters are getting bold." Isaac pulled Josephine deeper into the shadows as Frank and his foreman, Silas, descended the porch steps and headed toward the barn, directly toward their hiding place. With nowhere else to go, Isaac silently opened the door of a nearby storage shed and pulled Josephine inside. They pressed themselves against the wall, hardly daring to breathe as footsteps approached. "I'm telling you, boss," Silas was saying, "that girl's long gone, probably in California by now." "She's not," Frank replied, his voice cold and certain. "She wouldn't leave her precious father to face ruin alone. She's nearby, waiting for things to calm down. And that new hand, Everett, the one who disappeared the same day, find him and we'll find her." Frank's voice hardened. "And when we do, they'll both learn what happens to people who cross me." The footsteps continued past the shed and toward the barn. When they had faded, Isaac released the breath he'd been holding. "He knows," Josephine whispered, trembling. "He suspects you helped me." "It changes nothing," Isaac replied grimly. "We still need those papers." They waited until Frank and Silas had entered the barn before making their final dash to the bunkhouse. Inside, they found it nearly empty, just as planned. Two men snored in distant bunks, dead to the world after a long day's work. Isaac led Josephine to the far end of the building, to the last bunk, his former sleeping place. Kneeling, he worked his knife into the seam between the floorboards, prying up the third board to reveal a small cavity beneath. From it, he withdrew a package wrapped in oilcloth. "Got it," he whispered, tucking the package inside his coat. They retraced their steps carefully, slipping out of the bunkhouse and back into the shadows of the ranch yard. The main house was now dark, but light still spilled from the barn where Frank and Silas remained. They had nearly reached the edge of the property when disaster struck. A dog barked sharply from somewhere near the house. Then again, more urgently. Lights appeared in windows as the alarm spread. "Run!" Isaac hissed, grabbing Josephine's hand. They sprinted for the trees, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, shouts erupted as men emerged from buildings, drawn by the commotion. A lantern beam swept across the yard, missing them by inches as they reached the first line of trees. Gunfire cracked through the night, bullets splintering bark near Josephine's head. Isaac pulled her deeper into the forest, zigzagging between trunks to make them harder targets in the darkness. They reached their horses breathless and terrified. Isaac practically threw Josephine onto Copper's back before mounting his own horse. More shouts echoed from the direction of the ranch as they urged their mounts forward, crashing through the underbrush. "This way," Isaac called, leading them away from the trail, up a steep incline that the horses managed only with difficulty. Josephine clung to Copper's mane, ducking low branches and fighting to stay seated as the horse scrambled up the hillside. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as their unconventional route threw off the searchers. They rode hard for hours, changing direction frequently, crossing streams to mask their trail. Only when the eastern sky began to lighten did Isaac finally signal a halt in a dense thicket beside a small creek. "I think we lost them," he said, dismounting stiffly. Josephine nearly fell as she slid from Copper's back, her legs trembling with exhaustion and fading adrenaline. Isaac caught her, steadying her against him. For a moment they simply stood there holding each other, the package of documents pressed between them. "We did it," Josephine whispered, hardly believing they had escaped. "We're not safe yet," Isaac cautioned, though he made no move to release her. "Holloway will have men searching every trail between here and the mining camp." "Where do we go then?" Isaac thought for a moment. "There's a line cabin about 5 miles east of here. Belongs to the Murphy Ranch, but it's rarely used this time of year. We can rest there, figure out our next move." The line cabin was little more than a one-room shelter used by cowhands during roundup, but to Josephine's exhausted eyes, it looked like a palace. Isaac checked it thoroughly before allowing her inside, then set about building a small fire in the stone fireplace. "We shouldn't stay long," he said, "but we need rest, and the horses need it more." While Isaac tended to the horses, Josephine examined the package they'd risked so much to retrieve. Inside the oilcloth wrapping, she found a collection of papers, land deeds with suspicious alterations, receipts for payments to the sheriff and other officials, and a ledger detailing expenses that appeared to be bribes and payments to hired guns. When Isaac returned, she held up the documents. "This is enough, isn't it? Enough to bring him down." Isaac sat beside her, examining the papers. "It's circumstantial, but together with testimony from people he's wronged. Yes, I think a federal marshal would take interest." Then we need to get these to the territorial capital, Josephine said decisively. It's a 4-day ride from here, Isaac pointed out, and Holloway will have men watching every road. We can't go back to the mining camp, Josephine realized. That's the first place they'll look for us now. Isaac nodded grimly. Thomas and the others might be in danger already. We need to lead Holloway's men away from there. So we head for the capital, Josephine insisted. It's our best chance not just for us, but for everyone Holloway has hurt. Isaac studied her face, admiration clear in his eyes. You're something else, Josephine Walker. Most women would be falling apart after what we've just been through. Most women haven't spent 3 days hiding in a hayloft, she replied with a small smile. It changes your perspective. They allowed themselves a few hours of rest, taking turns keeping watch. When they set out again, it was with renewed determination. The territorial capital lay to the east, a journey that would take them through rugged country where Holloway's influence might be weaker. As they rode side by side where the terrain allowed, Josephine found herself studying Isaac's profile against the backdrop of pine-covered hills. In the short time she'd known him, he had become more important to her than she could have imagined. The thought of parting ways once their mission was complete left an unexpected hollowness in her chest. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After we reach the capital and deliver the evidence," Isaac glanced at her, surprised by the question. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." "Find my sister in Colorado, perhaps. Let her know Holloway might finally face justice." He paused. "What about you?" Josephine had been pondering the same question. "I can't go back to Silver Creek, not after everything that's happened. My reputation there is beyond repair." "Reputations aren't everything," Isaac said quietly. "No, but they matter in small towns," Josephine sighed. "I was thinking I might go to San Francisco. My mother's cousin lives there. She writes sometimes, has offered before for me to visit." Isaac nodded, his expression unreadable. "San Francisco's a good place for new beginnings." They rode in silence for a while, each contemplating futures that suddenly seemed to be diverging. Josephine wanted to ask if he might consider San Francisco too, but the words stuck in her throat. What right did she have to ask him to change his plans? Their connection, however strong it felt, had formed under extraordinary circumstances. In the normal world they were practically strangers. As the day wore on, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain by nightfall. They pushed on, hoping to reach a small settlement Isaac knew of before the weather turned. They were crossing an exposed ridgeline when Isaac suddenly reined in his horse, scanning the valley below. Josephine followed his gaze and felt her blood run cold. In the distance, a group of riders was moving along the main trail, at least 6 men, riding hard. "Holloway's men?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Isaac nodded grimly. "They're heading toward the settlement. They must have guessed our destination. What do we do?" Isaac studied the terrain, considering their options. "We can't outrun them on this route. We need to change direction, find somewhere to wait them out." He led them off the ridge, down a steep game trail that descended into a densely wooded ravine. The going was treacherous, the horses picking their way carefully over loose stones and exposed roots. By the time they reached the bottom, the first drops of rain had begun to fall. "There should be a trapper's cabin somewhere along this creek," Isaac said, raising his voice against the increasing patter of rain on leaves. "I stayed there once, years ago." They followed the creek for nearly an hour, the rain steadily intensifying until they were both soaked through. Josephine's teeth chattered as water trickled down her neck and under her collar. Just when she thought they would have to make camp in the open, exposed to the elements, Isaac pointed ahead. There. Through the curtain of rain, Josephine could just make out the dark outline of a small cabin, nestled against the base of a rocky outcropping. It looked abandoned, the door hanging slightly ajar, but it was shelter. The interior was musty but dry, with a small stone fireplace and crude furnishings, a rough-hewn table, a single chair, and a narrow bed frame with no mattress. While Josephine wrung water from her hair and clothes, Isaac managed to start a fire using dry wood stacked beside the hearth. "We should be safe here for the night," he said, returning from settling the horses in a lean-to behind the cabin. "The rain will wash away our tracks." Josephine huddled near the growing fire, shivering. "Do you think they'll give up the search?" "Not Holloway," Isaac replied grimly. "Not until he gets what he wants." He rummaged through his saddlebags, producing a spare shirt. "Here, you should change out of those wet clothes. I'll step outside." "You're as wet as I am," Josephine protested, "and it's pouring out there." "I'll check the lean-to for supplies," he said, clearly trying to give her privacy. When he had gone, Josephine quickly stripped off her sodden clothes and pulled on Isaac's shirt. It fell nearly to her knees, the sleeves extending well past her fingertips. She rolled them up and spread her wet garments near the fire to dry. Isaac returned a few minutes later, carrying a dusty burlap sack. "Found some beans and jerky," he reported, carefully keeping his eyes averted when he noticed her state of undress. "And what might have once been coffee, though I wouldn't vouch for its quality now." Despite their precarious situation, Josephine found herself smiling at his obvious discomfort. "Your shirt is much warmer than my wet things. Thank you." Isaac nodded, busying himself with examining the food supplies to avoid looking at her. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming on the cabin's roof and turning the world beyond the single small window into a gray blur. "You should get out of your wet clothes too," Josephine said practically. "You'll catch your death otherwise." Isaac hesitated, then nodded. "Turn around," Josephine complied, facing the fire while she listened to the rustle of fabric as he changed. When he told her it was safe to look, she found him wrapped in a threadbare blanket he must have found in the lean-to. His wet clothes added to the collection, drying by the fire. They shared a simple meal of jerky and beans warmed over the fire, the rhythm of the rain creating a cocoon of isolation around the tiny cabin. The peculiar intimacy of their situation alone, partially dressed, dependent on each other, wasn't lost on either of them. "Quite a change from the life you might have had as Mrs. Holloway," Isaac observed, breaking a long silence. Josephine shuddered. "I thank God every day that I overheard that conversation and ran when I did." She studied the flames dancing in the fireplace. "Even if we fail to bring him to justice, even if we have to run forever, it's better than being tied to such a man." "We won't fail," Isaac said with quiet determination, "and you won't have to run forever." Their eyes met across the small space, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of their shared purpose, but also of the deeper connection that had formed amid danger and flight. "Isaac," Josephine began hesitantly, "when this is over—" A sudden crash of thunder interrupted her, making them both jump. The storm had intensified, wind now howling around the cabin's walls and finding every crack to whistle through. "This place isn't as sound as it looked," Isaac said, rising to check the roof where a small leak had developed in one corner. Josephine watched him move around the cabin, securing what he could against the storm's onslaught. There was something profoundly comforting about his presence, his quiet competence in the face of challenges, both large and small. As the evening wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, they settled on opposite sides of the fire, wrapped in what blankets and dry clothing they had between them. Despite her exhaustion, Josephine found sleep elusive, her mind replaying the events that had brought her to this moment. "Isaac," she whispered into the firelit darkness. "Are you awake?" "Yes," came his reply. "Can't sleep. Too much thinking." She pulled her blanket tighter. "About everything that's happened, about what comes next." Isaac shifted, sitting up to add another log to the fire. "Regrets?" "No," Josephine answered without hesitation. "Only uncertainties." "About what?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "About us. About what happens after we reach the capital. You talk of Colorado, I speak of San Francisco, and yet—" "And yet," Isaac prompted when she fell silent. "And yet I can't imagine saying goodbye to you," she finished softly. In the flickering firelight, she saw him go very still. For a terrible moment, she feared she had misread everything, had imagined a connection that existed only in her own heart. Then Isaac moved, crossing the small space to kneel beside her. "Josephine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been trying to find the right words, the right moment, but maybe there isn't one." "For what?" "To tell you that these past days with you have meant more to me than years elsewhere. That the thought of parting ways leaves me cold in a way that has nothing to do with this storm." He reached out, tentatively touching her cheek. "I never expected to find you, Josephine Walker. But now that I have, I don't want to let you go." Josephine leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "Then don't," she whispered. The kiss, when it came, was gentle, at first a question, an offering. Then Josephine slid her arms around his neck, and gentleness gave way to a hunger that had been building since that first day in the hayloft. Isaac pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair as the blanket slipped from her shoulders. When they finally parted, breathless, Josephine rested her forehead against his. "I've never felt this way," she admitted. "So quickly, so completely." "Nor I," Isaac replied. "And I've been fighting it, telling myself it's just the circumstances, the danger pushing us together." "Is it?" He shook his head, smiling slightly. "No, it's you, Josephine, just you." Outside, the storm raged on, but within the cabin's walls, they had found a shelter more secure than any physical structure could provide in each other's arms, in the promise of a future neither had anticipated but both now desired more than anything. Morning brought clear skies and difficult decisions. They needed to continue their journey to the territorial capital, but the storm had cost them valuable time. Holloway's men would still be searching, possibly with reinforcements. "We should avoid the main trails completely," Isaac advised as they prepared to depart. "It will take longer, but we'll be safer." Josephine nodded, her mind still partly occupied with the shift in their relationship. They had spent the night wrapped in each other's arms, sharing warmth and whispered confidences, but had gone no further. There would be time for that, they had agreed, when they were truly safe. As they rode through the rain-freshened forest, Josephine found herself studying Isaac with new eyes, noting the strength in his shoulders, the gentle way he handled his horse, the watchful care he took to keep them both safe. This was a man worth running for, worth fighting for. They made good progress that day, skirting wide around the small settlement where they had spotted Holloway's men. By sunset, they had crossed into terrain Isaac was less familiar with, forcing them to rely on his compass and the stars as they emerged. "We should reach Miller's Creek by tomorrow afternoon," Isaac said as they made camp in a sheltered hollow. "From there, it's 2 more days to the capital if we push hard." Josephine nodded, feeding small sticks into their modest fire. "Do you think the marshal will act quickly once we show him the evidence?" "Hard to say. Politics can complicate justice." Isaac's expression was troubled. "But the evidence is strong, especially with our testimony to back it up." "And if it's not enough?" Josephine asked the question that had been nagging at her. "If Holloway's influence reaches even there," Isaac sat beside her, taking her hand. "Then we keep moving. Oregon, California, wherever we need to go to stay beyond his reach. He squeezed her fingers gently. Together. The promise in that single word warmed Josephine more than the fire before them. Together, she echoed, sealing it with a kiss. They reached Miller's Creek the following day, a settlement barely worthy of the name, just a trading post, a livery, and a handful of cabins clustered near the creek that gave the place its name. They approached cautiously, watching for any sign of Holloway's men. "Seems quiet," Isaac observed, scanning the dusty street. "But we should be quick. Supplies and information, that's all we need." They left their horses at the livery, paying extra for fresh mounts to be ready within the hour. At the trading post, they purchased provisions while Isaac casually inquired about traffic on the road to the capital. "Had a group of riders through yesterday," the shopkeeper told them, counting out their change. 6, maybe 7 men, asking questions about a young couple heading east. Josephine and Isaac exchanged glances. "Did they say why they were looking?" Isaac asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Something about the woman being a runaway bride," the shopkeeper chuckled. "Said her family was worried sick. Offered a reward for information." "That's terrible," Josephine said, forcing concern into her voice. "Did they say where they were headed next, east toward the capital?" The shopkeeper studied them more closely. "You folks heading that way too, south?" Isaac lied smoothly. "My sister's expecting her first child. We're hoping to make it in time." The shopkeeper nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation. As they left the store, Isaac guided Josephine toward the livery with a hand at the small of her back. "They're ahead of us," he murmured, "and they know we're bound for the capital." "What do we do?" Josephine asked, fighting to keep the panic from her voice. Isaac's expression was grim but determined. "Change of plans. There's another route harder through the high country, but it comes out north of the capital. They won't be watching for us there." "How much longer will it take? An extra day, maybe 2. Isaac met her eyes. "It's the safer choice, Josephine." She nodded, trusting his judgment. "Then that's what we'll do." With fresh horses and supplies, they set out from Miller's Creek, but instead of continuing east as expected, they turned north toward the distant mountains. The terrain quickly grew more challenging: steep slopes, dense forest, and narrow trails that sometimes disappeared altogether, forcing them to navigate by Isaac's instincts alone. By nightfall, they had climbed high enough that the air carried a distinct chill. They made camp in a small clearing, keeping their fire small to avoid detection from below. "We should reach the pass by tomorrow afternoon," Isaac said, studying the starlit peaks ahead. "After that, it's all downhill to the capital." Josephine wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders, gazing at the vast wilderness surrounding them. "It's beautiful up here, peaceful." "It is," Isaac agreed, settling beside her. "My father used to bring me hunting in mountains like these when I was a boy." Said a man could find himself in the high country, away from the noise of towns and other people's expectations. "Your father sounds wise." "He was." Isaac's expression softened with memory. "Died when I was 16. Taught me everything I know about surviving out here, though." Josephine leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "My mother taught me to ride. Father thought it unladylike, but she insisted. Said a woman should always have a way to leave if she needed to." She smiled sadly. "I didn't understand what she meant until recently." Isaac slipped an arm around her. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Josephine sighed. "I still miss her every day." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Despite the danger still pursuing them, despite the uncertain reception that awaited them at the capital, Josephine felt a profound sense of peace. Here with Isaac, she had found something true, something worth any risk or hardship. "Isaac," she said softly, turning to face him in the firelight. "Whatever happens when we reach the capital, I want you to know that I don't regret any of it. Running from the wedding, hiding in that hayloft, all of it led me to you." His eyes, reflecting the flames, held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I came looking for justice," he said, cupping her face with one calloused hand. "I found something more important." Their kiss was deeper this time, laden with promise and shared understanding. When they finally parted, Josephine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath his shirt. "When this is over," she murmured, "what do you truly want?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "Peace," he said finally. "Land of my own, perhaps, somewhere to build a life." He tilted her chin up to meet her gaze. "With you, if you'll have me." The simplicity of it, the rightness, brought tears to Josephine's eyes. "I will," she whispered, "wherever that may be." They sealed the promise with another kiss, this one carrying the weight of future plans and shared dreams. Later, wrapped in blankets and each other's arms, they slept more peacefully than either had in weeks. Morning brought a clear sky and renewed determination. They broke camp efficiently and continued their ascent toward the mountain pass. The trail grew steeper, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses across particularly treacherous sections. By midday, they had reached a vantage point that allowed them to see for miles in all directions. Below, the land spread out in a patchwork of forest, meadow, and winding creek beds. In the far distance, a smudge of smoke marked what might be the territorial capital. "We're making good time," Isaac said, offering Josephine his canteen. "The pass is just ahead." As they prepared to continue, a sound carried on the wind the distant but unmistakable whinny of a horse. Isaac immediately pulled Josephine into the cover of nearby pines, scanning the slopes below. "There," he whispered, pointing to a spot where the trail they had followed curved around a rocky outcropping. Josephine squinted, then caught her breath as she spotted them riders, at least 4, following their trail up the mountainside. "How did they find us?" she whispered, fear clutching at her heart. "Someone in Miller's Creek must have talked," Isaac replied grimly, "or they guessed our route." He assessed their position, mind working rapidly. "The pass is our only option. Once we're through, the trail splits several ways. We can lose them there." They mounted quickly and urged their horses forward at the fastest pace the treacherous trail would allow. The path narrowed as they approached the pass, bordered on one side by a sheer rock face and on the other by a dizzying drop to the valley below. The sounds of pursuit grew closer as they reached the highest point of the pass, a narrow gap between towering rock formations. Beyond it, the trail descended through scattered pines toward the eastern slopes. "We're almost there," Isaac encouraged, leading the way through the gap. Once we're on the other side, a rifle shot cracked through the mountain air, the bullet ricocheting off stone near Isaac's head. He ducked instinctively, pulling his own pistol as he urged his horse forward. "Ride," he shouted to Josephine. "Don't stop." More shots followed as they broke into the open ground beyond the pass. Josephine leaned low over her horse's neck, heart hammering as they galloped down the eastern slope. The trail here was wider, allowing for greater speed, but also offering less cover. Isaac fired back once, twice, forcing their pursuers to take cover momentarily. It bought them precious seconds as they thundered down the mountainside. At a fork in the trail, Isaac veered right without hesitation, leading them into denser forest. The thick pines swallowed them, deadening the sounds of pursuit. They rode hard for what felt like hours, changing direction whenever the trail branched, creating a confusing path for anyone trying to follow. Only when their horses began to tire did Isaac finally signal a halt in a small clearing beside a tumbling stream. They dismounted quickly, leading the winded animals to drink. "Did we lose them?" Josephine asked, scanning the forest behind them. Isaac shook his head. "Not for long. They'll spread out, try to pick up our trail." He checked his pistol, frowning at the limited ammunition remaining. "We need to keep moving, but at a sustainable pace. The horses won't last otherwise." Josephine nodded, patting her mount's sweating neck. "How far to the capital now?" "If we keep to this heading, we should reach it by tomorrow evening." Isaac's expression was troubled. "But they'll be watching the main approaches. We need another way in." As they allowed the horses a brief rest, Isaac studied a crude map he carried, tracing potential routes with his finger. "There's a river that runs near the capital," he said finally. "If we can reach it, we might be able to approach from the waterside where they're less likely to be watching." It was a desperate plan, but neither could see a better alternative. They mounted again and continued at a steadier pace, conserving their horses' strength while maintaining vigilant watch for signs of pursuit. As the day wore on, the forest gradually thinned, giving way to rolling hills dotted with stands of aspen. They kept to the valleys between hills when possible, using the terrain to mask their movements. By late afternoon, they had reached the river Isaac had mentioned, a broad, swift-flowing waterway that curved toward the distant capital. They followed its course, staying just within the tree line to avoid being silhouetted against the open water. "We'll make camp after dark," Isaac decided as the sun began its descent. "Keep moving until then." Twilight was settling over the landscape when they finally stopped in a dense thicket near the riverbank. They dared not light a fire, instead sharing a cold meal of jerky and hard biscuits from their supplies. "One more day," Josephine said softly, leaning against Isaac's shoulder as they watched stars appear in the darkening sky. "Then this will all be over one way or another." He kissed her temple gently. "One more day," he agreed. "And then we start building that life we talked about." They took turns keeping watch through the night, allowing each other brief periods of rest. Josephine's watch came in the quietest hours before dawn, when the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the new day. Seated on a fallen log, rifle across her knees, she gazed at Isaac's sleeping form and marveled at the twist of fate that had brought them together. A month ago, she had been resigned to a loveless marriage for her father's sake. Now she was a fugitive, pursued across the territory, yet somehow freer than she'd ever been. Morning brought a light mist rising from the river, obscuring the landscape in a pearly haze. They ate quickly and prepared to depart, Isaac studying the terrain ahead. "The capital should be visible from that ridge," he said, pointing to a rise about 2 miles distant. "From there, we can plan our approach." They had just mounted when a sound froze them, both hoofbeats, approaching from the direction they had come the previous day. "Move," Isaac urged, voice low and urgent. "Into the trees." They guided their horses deeper into the forest, moving parallel to the river as quickly as they dared in the limited visibility. The mist provided cover but also concealed their pursuers, making it impossible to gauge their number or exact location. They had gone perhaps half a mile when shots rang out behind them, followed by shouts. Their position had been discovered. "Ride," Isaac commanded, abandoning stealth for speed. They broke from the cover of trees, galloping across open ground toward the ridge Isaac had indicated. More shots followed, bullets kicking up dirt around their horses' hooves. Josephine bent low over her mount's neck, urging him to greater speed. They were halfway across the open ground when disaster struck. Isaac's horse stumbled, perhaps catching a hoof in a ground squirrel's burrow. The animal went down hard, throwing Isaac clear but falling awkwardly itself. Josephine reined in sharply, turning back despite Isaac's shouted warning to keep going. She reached him as he scrambled to his feet, his face grim as he assessed his horse's condition. The animal was trying to rise but clearly favoring one leg. "He's lamed," Isaac said tersely, retrieving his rifle from its scabbard. "Take the documents." He thrust the oilcloth package into her hands. "Ride for the capital. Find Marshal Dawson. He's a good man. He'll listen." "I'm not leaving you," Josephine protested. "You must." Isaac's eyes held hers intently. "This is bigger than us, Josephine. Those papers are evidence of crimes against dozens of families. They need to reach the marshal." The sounds of pursuit grew louder. Their hunters had spotted them and were closing in rapidly. "Go," Isaac insisted, giving her horse a slap on the flank. "I'll hold them off, buy you time." Tears blurred Josephine's vision as her horse leaped forward. "I'll come back for you," she called over her shoulder. "I promise." Isaac took up a position behind his fallen horse, rifle ready as Josephine galloped toward the ridge. She didn't look back, couldn't bear to, focusing instead on the path ahead and the vital mission she now carried alone. She reached the ridge and crested it, the territorial capital suddenly visible in the valley, beyond a sprawling town of wooden buildings surrounding a central square where the territorial government buildings stood. So close, yet it might as well have been 100 miles with Holloway's men between her and safety. Gunfire echoed from behind the ridge. Josephine fought the overwhelming urge to turn back, to ride to Isaac's aid. But the package pressed against her side reminded her of what was at stake: not just their lives, but justice for countless others who had suffered under Holloway's reign of intimidation. She spurred her horse down the far side of the ridge, taking a direct line toward the capital. The terrain here was open grassland with occasional copses of trees good for speed but offering little cover. She pushed her mount to its limits, knowing every second counted. She had covered perhaps half the distance to the town when movement to her right caught her attention: riders, cutting across her path from a side trail. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought they were more of Holloway's men, but as they drew closer, she recognized the uniform of the territorial militia on the lead rider. Josephine changed course, heading directly toward the patrol. "Help!" she shouted, waving frantically. "Please, I need the marshal," the patrol leader, a grizzled captain with a thick mustache, reined in as she approached. "What's the trouble, miss?" "Men pursuing me," Josephine gasped, fighting to catch her breath. "Franklin Holloway's men. I have evidence of his crimes: land theft, bribery, intimidation. My friend," her voice broke. "They're holding him back there on the ridge." The captain's eyes narrowed at Holloway's name. "Holloway, you say?" he signaled to his men. "Jones, take the lady to Marshal Dawson. The rest of you with me." Relief flooded through Josephine as a young militiaman moved his horse alongside hers. "This way, madam," he said, guiding her toward town. "Please," she begged the captain before they parted, "my friend Isaac Everett is back there holding them off. He's alone." The captain nodded grimly. "We'll find him, madam. You have my word." Marshal James Dawson was everything Isaac had promised: a man of integrity with a deeply ingrained sense of justice. In his office at the territorial courthouse, Josephine told her story from beginning to end, from her abandoned wedding to the evidence they had risked everything to retrieve. The marshal examined the documents carefully, his expression growing darker with each page he turned. "This is serious," he said finally, looking up at Josephine. "Very serious indeed. Holloway's been suspected of such activities for years, but no one's been able to prove anything." "Will it be enough?" Josephine asked anxiously. "Enough to stop him?" "With your testimony and your friends, if we find him alive, yes, I believe so." The marshal stood, moving to the window that overlooked the town square. "Captain Reynolds is a good man. If your Isaac is still out there, they'll bring him back." Hours passed with agonizing slowness as Josephine waited in the marshal's office, alternating between pacing and sitting with her head in her hands. The marshal arranged for food to be brought, which she barely touched, and offered her clean clothes from his wife's wardrobe, which she accepted gratefully. It was nearing sunset when hoofbeats in the street below drew her to the window. The militia patrol was returning, and in their midst, slumped but upright on a borrowed horse, was Isaac. Josephine flew down the stairs and into the street, heedless of propriety or curious onlookers. Isaac dismounted stiffly, his face pale beneath a layer of dirt and what appeared to be dried blood from a graze on his temple. "Isaac," she cried, throwing herself into his arms. He caught her, wincing slightly but holding her tight. "You made it," he murmured into her hair. "I knew you would." "Are you badly hurt?" she asked, drawing back to examine him. "Nothing serious." He touched the wound on his temple. "Bullet grazed me. I'm more bruised than anything." His eyes searched hers. "The documents, did you give them to Dawson?" "Yes, he has them. He thinks it's enough, Isaac." "Enough to bring charges against Holloway." The relief in his expression was profound. Captain Reynolds approached, resting a hand briefly on Isaac's shoulder. "Your friend held off 5 of Holloway's men long enough for the lady to get clear," he told Josephine. "When we arrived, he was still fighting, though outnumbered. 2 of Holloway's men are dead, the rest in custody." Josephine's arms tightened around Isaac. "Thank you, Captain, for bringing him back to me." Inside the marshal's office, Isaac confirmed Josephine's account and added his own testimony about his sister's ranch and other properties Holloway had seized through intimidation. Marshal Dawson took copious notes, his determination to see justice done evident in every question he asked. "We'll hold the men we captured," he said when they had finished. "And I'm issuing a warrant for Franklin Holloway's arrest today. Captain Reynolds will ride for Silver Creek at first light with a full contingent." "What about Josephine's father?" Isaac asked. "Holloway was using a loan to pressure him." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "The Territorial Bank can review the terms of that loan. If there's evidence of coercion or illegal pressure, as I suspect there is, we can have it declared void." He looked at Josephine kindly. "Your father won't lose his ranch, Miss Walker." Relief washed over Josephine, though tinged with uncertainty. Her father had been willing to sell her into a loveless marriage to save the ranch. Could she ever truly forgive that? As if sensing her thoughts, Isaac squeezed her hand. "One step at a time," he murmured. "You don't have to decide everything tonight." The marshal arranged rooms for them at the hotel across the square, separate rooms, with a knowing smile that suggested he understood there was more between them than friendship, but was maintaining proprieties. In the privacy of her room, Josephine finally allowed herself to process everything that had happened. The fear, the chase, the near loss of Isaac, it all crashed over her in waves until she found herself sobbing with relief and lingering terror. A soft knock at her door roused her. She opened it to find Isaac, cleaned up and wearing borrowed clothes, his temple now properly bandaged. "I heard you crying," he said softly. "Are you all right?" She pulled him inside and closed the door, propriety be damned. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, pressing her face against his chest. "When I had to leave you there." "Shh," he soothed, stroking her hair. "You did exactly right. Because of you, Holloway will finally face justice. All those families will have a chance at restitution." "I don't care about any of that right now," she admitted. "I only care that you're safe." Isaac tilted her chin up, his blue eyes serious in the lamplight. "Josephine Walker, when I found you in that hayloft, I told you your hiding ends with me. I meant it then as a promise of safety, but now." He took a deep breath. "Now I mean it as something more. I love you. I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Josephine's heart swelled with joy so intense it was almost painful. "I love you too," she whispered. "And yes, Isaac Everett, I will have you for all my days." Their kiss sealed the promise, no longer fugitives, no longer running, but two people who had found in each other something worth fighting for, worth risking everything to protect. In the days that followed, justice moved with surprising swiftness. Franklin Holloway was arrested at his ranch without incident, the fight seeming to go out of him when faced with the evidence and the testimony arrayed against him. The territorial governor, concerned about the scandal's potential impact, ensured the legal proceedings moved quickly. Word reached them that Josephine's father had reacted to news of her safety with genuine relief, though his pride still prevented him from approving her choices. She wrote to him, explaining everything, leaving the door open for reconciliation without promising to return. 1 month after their arrival at the territorial capital, Josephine stood beside Isaac in Marshal Dawson's home, exchanging vows before a small gathering of those who had helped them. The marshal's wife had insisted on providing Josephine with a proper dress, not as elaborate as the wedding gown she had abandoned, but beautiful in its simplicity. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the justice of the peace declared, beaming at the young couple. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Everett." Isaac's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, drawing cheers from their small audience. As they turned to face their well-wishers, Josephine felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with the ceremony and everything to do with the man beside her. Later, at the small reception in the marshal's dining room, Captain Reynolds approached with news. "Thought you'd want to know," he told them quietly. "Holloway's been sentenced. 20 years for his crimes. The judge was particularly harsh given the number of families affected." "Thank you for telling us," Isaac said, shaking the captain's hand. "That's the best wedding gift we could receive." As the celebration continued around them, Isaac led Josephine out onto the small porch for a moment of privacy. The summer evening was warm, stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "So, Mrs. Everett," he said, the name new and wonderful on his lips, "are you ready for our next adventure?" Josephine smiled up at him, her heart full. "With you, always." They had decided to travel west to Oregon, where land was still available for homesteading. Isaac's sister and her husband would join them there, pooling their resources to build new lives far from the shadows of their past. "I've been thinking," Isaac said, drawing her close, "about something you said that night in the trapper's cabin, about your mother teaching you to ride so you'd always have a way to leave if you needed to." Josephine nodded, remembering. "What about it?" "I want to promise you something." His eyes were serious in the fading light. "You'll never need to run from me, but if you ever want to ride, I'll be right beside you. Partners always." Tears of happiness blurred Josephine's vision as she stood on tiptoe to kiss him. "Partners," she agreed. "Always." 2 years later, Josephine stood on the porch of their homestead in Oregon's Willamette Valley, watching Isaac return from the fields with their daughter, little Elizabeth, perched on his shoulders. The toddler's delighted giggles carried across the yard, bringing a smile to Josephine's lips. Their farm was thriving, modest, but growing steadily with each season. Isaac's sister and her husband had built their own place just over the next rise, close enough for regular visits, but far enough for privacy. Together, the families had created a supportive community in this new land. Word had reached them the previous winter that Josephine's father had finally swallowed his pride and written to her, expressing regret for his role in pushing her toward marriage with Holloway. He had asked if he might visit when the weather improved. Josephine had responded with cautious optimism. inviting him to meet the granddaughter he didn't yet know. As Isaac approached the house, swinging Elizabeth down into his arms, Josephine felt the familiar surge of love that had only deepened with time. The fearful bride who had hidden in a hayloft seemed like someone from another life, now a chapter in their story that had led to this abundant present. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked as he joined her on the porch, passing their sleepy daughter into her arms. "You look miles away." "I was thinking about how it all began," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "How finding you was worth everything we went through." Isaac's kiss was as tender as ever, carrying the warmth of their shared life. "Your hiding ended with me," he murmured against her hair, "but our journey was just beginning." Josephine nodded, holding their daughter close as they gazed out over the land they had claimed together, not through intimidation or power, but through hard work and hope. This was their true wealth, their legacy. A life built on love, justice, and the courage to choose their own path. "And what a beautiful journey it is," she whispered, standing tall beside the man who had found her when she was lost and loved her when she was afraid. Together, they had outrun the past and built a future brighter than either could have imagined alone.